had in the last video, which is the class of person, which has two functions or methods inside it. One of them is the initialization function, and the other one is the display function. And then we have the variable people, which is equal to the person class with two parameters, male and the name Alex, and then we display that. And if you run that, then you'll see that we have exactly the same as what we had last time. Now, what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to explain what it is, why we call it a method and not a function, and also what a method actually is. So, within a class, a method is used to perform functionality, and we do this by using the dot operator, which is the full stop or the period used within the variable. So we have people.display. So that tells us that we're going to the people variable, which is equal to the person class, and then within the person class, we're then calling the function or the method display. And the reason why we're calling it the method and not a variable is because we put parameters afterwards. So this dot operator allows us to call upon an attribute of the object, which is the person class, and so the object, the attribute within the person object or the person class is actually going to be as method this time. However, if we remove the parameters, that would call forward, or that would call a variable. Now, obviously, we don't have a variable called display, so I'm going to put the parameters back in there and keep it as it is. And now, if we look up here, you'll see that we have the self, gender, and name. Now, this is all explained in the previous video, so if you check that out if you've forgotten or if you don't quite understand. And as you can see, all we have to do now is call the self parameter or the self variable within every other function. So if I was to create another function, we'd only have to call self, and we would have all the data within that which we needed. Now, obviously, within this, we can add another parameter, say value, and we can print that as well. So print value, and that will work perfectly fine. And if I had, say, the value 12 and run that, it will work exactly the same way. So you don't have to put all your parameters within the initialization. The only reason why you put parameters inside your initialization is if you want them to be used within multiple functions or methods within that class. And the reason why you do that is because you apply them to the self dot, then whatever the local variable you want to call it, and that will mean that they are accessible within every single function because you will call self on every single function as well. So if we remove that for now, because that was just to show you what you can do, and if you don't call the init function, then that's perfectly fine. It works perfectly well. Obviously, you can't pass in these variables or these parameters like you're doing now because they won't go anywhere. You'd have to call them and pass them all in individually. So in each, say, function which you need. So in the display, because we're using the gender and we're using the name, you'd have to pass those two here and collect them in the parameters area of the display definition instead of doing it in the initialization definition. But that doesn't really matter too much because most of the time you will call this all within the actual initialization function. Okay, so to show you what other things we can do and why people use classes rather than just methods or functions is if we do exactly the same thing as what we have at the moment, just recreate it. So we have two people definitions now. The first one is the initial one, or the original one, which we had before, which is you are male and your name is Alex. And the second one, we're just going to call it, assign it to a variable called people2. And that's going to be equal to a female called Joan. And if we do people2.display and then run that, you'll see that we have two different things called now. Even though we're using the same class and the same object, we're using different objects even though it's the same class. So the initialization variable, because it's self, that refers to it being its object rather than it being a class. So all that self variable and all the variables passed to it are going to be contained within an object, namely the people variable. Whereas on people2, all the data which is passed into it and stored within it is not going to be stored within the class itself, but it's going to be stored within the object, which is people2. So that's why we can call the same method, but on different variables, and we get different outputs, as you can see here. Now, this is actually called encapsulation, and it's a very, very important part of object-oriented programming, because it means that we can have multiple things running side by side exactly the same way and without them conflicting with each other. As you can see here, we've got people1 and people2, and they don't conflict with each other even though they're both calling person. Whereas if we were doing this with just methods or just functions outside of a class, then they could easily conflict with each other because encapsulation does not actually take place. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.